bad situations can sometimes lead to good outcomes. The Soviet Union was not an ideal country to live in, but as a result of its conditions, there was a large amount of interesting art, literature, and music that got made. One example of this is the singer-songwriter Viktor Tsoi and his band, Kino. Not only was their music good, but Viktor Tsoi became one of the most prominent cultural figures in the Soviet Union, and his music still lives. In 2004, the Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda would declare Kino the second most influential Russian band of all time. Today, I'm going to be talking about the story of Viktor Tsoi and Kino. Let's cut to the chase. Let me start off with a world history lesson that I swear is relevant. One thing that's important to know about Russia is that it's absolutely massive. As a result, there are a great number of people living there who aren't ethnically Russian. During the 1930s was a sizable Korean population in the far eastern region. Since, at the time, Korea was a part of the Japanese Empire, and given that the world was moving towards World War II, Joseph Stalin felt threatened by having so many Koreans so close to Japan, worried that they would betray the Soviet Union. As a result, he enacted a mass deportation in September of 1937, which moved the Koreans of Eastern Russia to Central Asia, Kazakhstan in particular. Two people who were deported were the parents of one Robert Maximovich Tsoi, Viktor Tsoi's dad. Therefore, in a way, we have Joseph Stalin and his tyrannical paranoia to thank for the music of Kino. Viktor Tsoi was born on June 21st, 1962. He shares his birthday with Lana Del Rey, Chris Pratt, and some British dude. At the time of his birth, the Soviet Union was led by Nikita Khrushchev, although he was soon ousted and replaced by Leonid Brezhnev in 1964. Brezhnev was notorious for his habit of kissing other men as a way of greeting them. His kiss of East German Chancellor Erich Honecker was immortalized in the Berlin Wall mural, "Mein Gott, hilf mir, diese tödliche Liebe zu überleben," or "My God, help me to survive this deadly love." Wait, what was I talking about again? Oh, right. The period of Brezhnev's leadership would later be considered the beginning of the era of stagnation. Under the leadership of Khrushchev, many of the Soviet Union's more repressive policies were relaxed in what has been termed the Khrushchev Thaw. Brezhnev, however, strengthened many of these repressive policies, and this was demonstrated in the infamous Sinyavsky-Daniel trial. This was a trial where two writers, Andrei Sinyavsky and Yuli Daniel, were sentenced to 7 and 5 years of hard labor, respectively, for writing satirical pieces making fun of the Soviet Union and smuggling them abroad. The era of stagnation was also defined by the increase of funding into the state military realm at the expense of pretty much every other field. Growth slowed and productivity fell. This is the world that Viktor Tsoi grew up in. Tsoi grew up in Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg. As an adolescent, he attended art school until he was expelled due to failing grades. After that, he went to trade school to study woodcarving. He was a fan of cinema growing up, particularly the Soviet actors Mikhail Boryalsky, best known for his role in cowboy films, and Vladimir Vyotsky, whose work as a singer-songwriter would further influence Tsoi. Tsoi would also become a fan of Bruce Lee later on, and this shaped his image as a musician. He began writing songs when he was 17. He later said about his early music tastes, "For me, rock started when I was 13 years old. Then I listened to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, T-Rex, in short, everything I could get off my mates. I remember that even in the pioneer camp where I spent my summers, we didn't just sing children's rhymes, but also nonsense lyrics to the music of the Beatles. We didn't know the real lyrics back then. Then I listened to Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Uriah Heep, and I caught the hard rock bug. But soon enough, I got fed up of this music, and I became interested in the new wave style and the melodies of the Sex Pistols." In the Soviet Union, arts were a heavy focus of the government, as they often are in authoritarian countries. As Kenneth Farmer says in his book, Ukrainian Nationalism in the Post-Stalin Era, one of the most obvious and explicit vehicles for symbolism and the expression of politically relevant myths in society is the arts. It is for this reason that totalitarian societies have placed rigid controls over literature, graphic arts, and performing arts. In order to be successful as a musician in the Soviet Union, it was essential to get state funding, a government policy intended to create a thriving art scene. In practice, though, this meant that the artists who got the most funding were the ones that the government committees deemed the most acceptable. This resulted in most of the popular Soviet acts being pop stars. Rock music was confined to the underground, and it wasn't until 1981 that the first legally permitted rock venue, the creatively named Leningrad Rock Club, was opened in, well, take a guess. Tsoi, however, wouldn't wait until then to get started in the scene, and many of his early concerts were played in people's apartments. Viktor Tsoi's first recording that I could find was as the bass player on the 1979 album Elephant Full Moon by the band Palata No. 6, a band named after the short story by Anton Chekhov. I skimmed through the album, and my god, the sound quality is truly horrible. It's the main reason I didn't listen all the way through. From what I could make out, though, the songwriting is pretty good. It reminds me of a lot of garage rock, like the Stooges. If someone recorded this with even mediocre production, I'd totally give it a listen. So I would eventually meet guitarist Alexei Rybin, and the two of them formed the band Avtomaticheski Udovlatoriteli. Later, they left and formed the group Garin Igiperboloidyi with the drummer Oleg Valinsky. They managed to gain membership to the Leningrad Rock Club, and this gave them a chance to grow their fan base. Shortly after the group's formation, however, Valinsky was drafted into the Red Army and had to leave. Tsoi and Rybin decided to keep going and renamed the band Kino, after the Russian word for cinema. In an interview around this time, Tsoi described his main influences as David Bowie, Roxy Music, and the Human League. That's a nice variety of music. Will Kino actually sound like them? Kino's first album, 45, was released in 1982. I couldn't find the day or month, oddly enough. With the band being only 2 people, they were helped out by the members of fellow Russian rockers Aquarium, who recorded other instruments such as drums, bass, and, oddly enough, flute. Wikipedia categorizes this as a folk rock, new wave, and pop album. I agree with folk rock and pop, but this doesn't sound new wave at all to me. The guitars are almost entirely acoustic, and the few electric guitar lines that you can hear are clean. It almost reminds me of Coffee Shop. Tsoi did say in an interview that Kino was always meant to be a semi-acoustic band, probably due to most of their concerts being in people's apartments at this time. Despite the album having instruments such as flute and glockenspiel, this feels super stripped down and basic. Tsoi's voice is a bit nasal, and I can see why some people might be turned off by the vocals. I feel it fits the raw nature of the songs, though. The drums are interesting. Half of the time they're blatantly programmed and don't do anything other than keep the beat, and the other half they're clearly played on hand percussion like bongos. The opening track, Vremya Jest Adienye Gniet, starts the album out on a great note. It has a very swagger-like sound to it, and it makes me think of cowboys. My favorite songs are Solntse D, which made me sway my head from side to side, and Vos Mechlasnitsa, which is the most listened to song on the album, and for good reason, with its nice vocal melody and lead guitar line. The title translates to 8th grade girl, and the lyrics discuss going on a date with a girl you like. Something that a lucky few of us have gotten to experience. Not long after the release of the album, a power struggle between Tsoi and Rybin resulted in Rybin leaving the group. He would soon be replaced by Yuri Kasparian. In 1983, the bootleg album 46 would be released, consisting largely of demo tracks. Tsoi was very insistent that this was not meant as a proper release, and the band still doesn't acknowledge it as a studio album. There are still good moments, don't get me wrong. Overdriven guitar makes an appearance on some songs, and the 4th song, Yaidu po Ulitsi, features nice bass playing, and a lead guitar line that honestly reminds me of the Beach Boys. Would I suggest this album? It couldn't hurt, but if you want to hear music in this style, just listen to 45. Shortly thereafter, the band expanded to include bassist Alexander Titov and drummer Georgy Guryanov. In 1984, they released Nachalnik Kamchatki. This definitely feels like the first album that was made by a proper band, since the first 2 felt more like Viktor Tsoi solo releases. It's also apparent that they had more time and resources to make this album, as the sound feels much more fleshed out. There's a heavy influence of synth pop, as synthesizers play a huge role. The synth influence is evident as early as the first song, Pozliedny Guyeroi, which has beeps and boops akin to a video game. The second song, Kazduyo Noch, builds on this sound by including a saxophone. This album has multiple appearances from Russian saxophonist Igor Butman.
Assman.
and he absolutely brings it. The song Ghost has an almost eerie vibe with its pounding beat and synthesizers. The bass playing has a great touch too. Overall, this is the first Kino album where the bass really stands out. Trolleybus has an almost ska vibe to it. The bass line is upbeat, the guitar is bright, and the saxophone is bringing it. I almost thought I was listening to Madness or The Specials. Finally, Khochu Peremen is just an all-around cool song. It exudes swagger. The bass playing is awesome, and the saxophone makes you imagine Igor wearing shades while he's playing. Contrast with the upbeat tone, the lyrics are super dark and discuss things like being strapped down and self-harming. Very kinky. This is by far the best album they've released up to this point. To be fair, when one of the albums that came before it was one Viktor Tsoi doesn't even like to acknowledge, doesn't make for tough competition. The evolution of Kino's sound would continue on the 1985 follow-up, Eto ne Lyubov. The synthesizers of the prior album were largely done away with, and this is a far more poppy album than anything they've done so far. That's not a bad thing at all. I do enjoy well-done pop music. At times, this album reminds me almost of R.E.M. In an interview, Tsoi said about the album, "You see, we didn't have high hopes for this album. We put a few old songs on it, and songs that were intended for use only among the band members. The thing is that the availability of the studio which we were working in was limited, and live drums was out of the question. We went for the most purely traditional sound, 3 guitars, no additional effects except on one song, and a drum machine. Initially, this lack of choice dragged us down a little, but in the recording process we came to enjoy it, and by the end of the recording, you could say that we even aimed for that kind of sound. Overall, I can say that considering the conditions we were working in, we did all we could." The guitars on this album are largely acoustic, which is a bit of a throwback to their first 2 studio albums. The opening title track gets things started on a good note, with its melodic singing and great bass playing. The bass on this is terrific. My favorite bass line is on Vermin, where it plays a standalone line and even a brief solo. Judging by the sound, I would also say that it's played on a fretless bass. Very jazzy for our Russian friends. On Gorod, there's a really chaotic and dissonant guitar solo, the first so far in Kino's discography that I can remember. It's hard to describe, and I strongly suggest listening to it. The album closer, Prokhoji, is a stylistic break from the rest of the album, sounding more like something you would hear on Nachalnik Kamchatki. The bass is staccato, the guitar is overdriven, and it sounds like something you would dance to. Kino had found its footing as a band, and things were looking up. They would only continue to improve thanks to some timely, real-world events. Way back at the start of the video, I mentioned that the leader of the Soviet Union during most of Viktor Tsoi's early life was Leonid Brezhnev, the man who ended the thaw of Stalinism and brought on stagnation. Well, one thing I didn't mention was that he died in 1982 and was replaced by Yuri Andropov. Andropov died after only 15 months and was replaced by Konstantin Chernenko. Chernenko didn't even make it that long, dying after only 13 months. He was replaced by the one and only Mikhail fucking Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev inherited a country in poor shape and realized that massive changes needed to be made. He implemented 2 policies that wouldn't be forgotten by the Soviet public: glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost, or openness, involved greatly increasing freedom of speech. Perestroika, or restructuring, involved the decentralizing of the political and economic structure of the Soviet Union. These policies would start a domino effect that, not even a decade later, would lead to the fall of the Soviet Union. For now, though, all you need to understand is that the environment in the Soviet Union around 1985 was one in which massive changes were about to happen. That would be the backdrop for all the music Kino would release from here on out. Later on, Tsoi would say about the musical atmosphere following Glasnost, "It's been 2 years since we've been able to open our mouths, and no one knows how this will end, so no one's wasting a single minute." In 1986, Kino released Noch. It was their first album to have an official release, although it was done by their label without their permission, much to their chagrin. I'm sure their anger eventually subsided, however, as this album sold 2 million copies and propelled the band to a new level of popularity. This album is them having officially shed their folk rock roots for a new sound, mixing post-punk and new wave. The opening track, Videli Noch, has a chord progression that makes me think of Passenger by Iggy Pop, which is always a good sign. The drum line and bass line are super upbeat, and during the chorus there are multiple vocal tracks. Towards the end, the saxophone comes in to end on a high note. There are some songs here, namely Tvoj Nomer and Posledny Giroj, where the guitar playing almost reminds me of R.E.M. Since R.E.M. are from Atlanta, I'm tempted to make a joke comparing Georgia the state to Georgia the former Soviet country, but it seems a bit too labored. Both of these songs also have terrific bass playing, with the former sounding almost like slap bass, and the latter being absolutely pumping. Tanets is a song that sounds like it would be played during a driving montage in an 80s movie. The guitar playing is upbeat, the bass sounds fretless, and there are sweeping synths during the chorus. All these songs sound like they would be perfect in a film soundtrack. Mama Anarchia is a song that, according to my dad, sounds like The Cars trying to cover London Calling by The Clash. Listening to it got my blood pumping immediately. The guitar line is crunchy sounding, and the hook is just terrific. I was singing it in my head during the rest of the album. The lyrics discuss the idea of mother anarchy and how she loves her sons. Compared to the government of the time, many people probably hoped for no government. This album is good even when Kino calms down. Noch and Igra are both played with clean guitars, and they make you want to close your eyes and sway your head. They demonstrate Viktor Tsoi's skills as a singer. While his voice is raw, it's beautiful sounding. It's important to mention that, as big as Kino was getting, Tsoi kept his day job working in the boiler room of an apartment building. Since Kino received no state funding and much of their music sales were bootleg, they didn't make enough money to solely focus on music. Tsoi seemed to like that, however. In an interview, he criticized many Western bands for focusing on money, saying, "Maybe there's some band that starts up and records a good album, but usually as soon as perceptive people in the West realize that they can make money off it, they buy it and the music stops being interesting. So I'm more interested in bands that work for independent labels. I never wanted and I never tried to become official, because for me it presents much bigger problems than just, say, working somewhere and playing the music that I want with the guys. Official musicians, one way or another, end up with a dependency on some organization and they can't do what they want." Later on, he said, when asked whether he considered himself to be a star of Soviet rock music, "It's hard to consider yourself a star while working in a boiler house." This would be the last album with bass player Alexander Titov, as he would leave to focus on his main band, the aforementioned Aquarium. As you can probably tell from how much I've mentioned the bass playing on the past 3 albums, he was a terrific addition to the band. He would be replaced with Igor Tikhimorov, and he would prove a worthy replacement on the follow-up, 1988's Gruppa Krovi. Before we get into that, however, it's time to discuss one of the most significant pieces of Kino-related media. I'm talking about the 1987 Soviet crime film, Assa. Now, Kino's role in the film is pretty minor. Tsoi shows up at the end to perform at a club and is given a list of rules by the club owner. However, he ignores her and goes on stage to play. The camera pans around to show that they're now playing in front of a large audience. However, the movie as a whole is pretty interesting, so I want to talk about it a little bit more. The film takes place in the Ukrainian city of Yalta. The plot follows Alika, a nurse who arrives in Yalta with her much older lover, Krimov, who's the head of a crime organization. While in Yalta, Alika meets a local musician named Bananan. Yes, that's actually what his character is called. I won't spoil the rest of the movie, but shenanigans do ensue. This is a very strange film. There's a lot of stuff that happens where you just have to accept it and move on. One character is, I think, meant to be an old man, even though he's played by a child with a fake mustache and gray powder rubbed in his hair. Or maybe he's just a little person. I honestly have no idea. There's a scene where one of Krimov's goons, who kind of looks like the guy from Black Midi, is arrested, and during his interrogation, he goes on a rant about how the death of the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, drove him insane. However, I didn't realize until reading the Wikipedia article that he apparently does this to avoid snitching on his boss. In the moment, it just seems like he's lost his mind. There are also a few scenes that detail an entirely different plot about the 1801 coup against Tsar Paul I. There's also a lot of awkward dialogue, but I won't hold this against the film since I'm sure it sounds more natural in Russian. A lot of the scenes don't have many cuts in them. I can't tell if this was a stylistic choice or a practical one to avoid time editing. This is an important film in the history of the Soviet Union. It was the first government-funded movie to include Kino, As a result, it can be considered the point when Gorbachev's reforms reached their peak phase. Their appearance at the end demonstrates Russian rock music being freed from the shackles of state regulation and reaching the masses. Would I recommend this movie? It's super long at 2.5 hours, and like I said, it can get pretty strange at times. That being said, given that it's free to watch on YouTube, it couldn't hurt to check it out. If you don't like it, hey, at least you didn't waste any money. Alright, back to the music. Let's talk about Gruppa Krovi. After the aforementioned label drama that surrounded Noch's release, Kino self-released this album on January 5th, 1988, making it the first album of theirs with a specific release date that I could find. The lack of label promotion did little to hamper this album's popularity. If Noch was the album that introduced Kino to Russians not already a part of the underground rock scene, then Gruppa Krovi was the album that ensured they would not soon be forgotten. This album all but detonated a bomb in the world of Russian music. In 1999, Russian rock radio station Nash Radio published their list of top 20th century rock songs, and the title track from this album topped the list. The title track is as good of an opening track as the album possibly could have had. The beat starts on the 1 and 3 instead of the 2 and 4. It actually works really well. Makes you want to pump your fists. Tikimorov's bass playing is driving, and it shows off how good of a replacement he is. The chorus is absolutely cathartic, and the outro riff is one you can sing along to. The title, literally translating to blood group or blood type, refers to how Russian soldiers would have their blood type written on their uniform sleeves in case they were wounded. The lyrics are not about an actual war, but use it as a metaphor for the struggle to change your life. The next song, Zakhroi za mnoi dver ya ukhoju, has a sweet keyboard solo. Overall, it sounds not sad, but melancholy. I dig it. It sounds like something you would hear at a dance club. Mama mi vesi soshli es uma reminded me of Aha when it began, with its synthesizer and punchy bass. Listening to the end, it still makes me think of Aha. There's not a ton of guitar, and the synthesizer's bass and programmed drums are the main focus. Prokhoji sounds like something you would hear on a college radio station. It reminds me of Everything by Nine Inch Nails, although that's a pretty specific example. The chorus has woo-oo vocals, and there are laughing sound effects during the bridge. This song slaps. The closer, Legenda, is a calm song. The guitar is clean, the singing is soft, and the drums do little more than keep the tempo. Towards the end, there are wave sound effects that fit the mood perfectly. Now, I've intentionally avoided talking about one particular song until now. Let me tell you about Spokoynaya Noch. Without it, I never would have discovered Kino. Some of you might be familiar with Songster, the tablature website. On the homepage, there's a list of the most popular play-along tabs. The top 20 or so seem to be set in stone. Master of Puppets by Metallica has been number 1 for about as long as I can remember. Occasionally, when I'm bored, I'll scroll down the list to see what songs are there. One day, at about the 35 spot, I came across a song with a Cyrillic title. Curious, I played it. That song was Spokoynaya Noch. I loved what I heard and went to listen to the actual song. It actually took me a bit to get past Viktor Tsoi's voice, since his singing on this track is a little lower than he normally sings, but once I got used to it, I loved it. Spokoynaya Noch is the most beautiful song in Kino's entire discography. The guitar playing is gentle and clean, both the lead guitar line and the acoustic backing track. The bass is simple and staccato, but it fits the song perfectly. It builds towards an ending with a distorted guitar line, and it's just... I don't even have words. There's a live clip on YouTube, and you can see a guy in the audience crying when the song finishes. I can't say I blame him. The title translates to Good Night, or Calm Night. The lyrics discuss seizing the opportunities you have in life and compares those who don't to those who stay asleep. In an earlier interview, when asked why he wrote so many songs about night, Tsoi said, "For me, night is a special time where all distractions disappear. But not only that, night fills me with mystical feelings. All subjects, events, and things become different at night. You yourself have perhaps noticed that a person remains exactly the same during the day and during the night. Nevertheless, they are different people. You could say that the night gives me a romantic feeling." So yeah, Safe to say this is a great album. On September 16th, 1988, the Kazakh film The Needle was released, the second film of Viktor Tsoi's acting career. As opposed to Assa, where he only has a small cameo at the end, Tsoi stars as the main lead in this film. Another major difference between The Needle and Assa is the length. While Assa was a behemoth at 2.5 hours, The Needle is only 76 minutes. That's barely feature length. Wikipedia has the time listed as 81 minutes, but the free versions I could find had the shorter runtime. Fingers crossed that those extra 5 minutes don't change the entire movie. The movie is about a mysterious man who arrives in Kazakhstan to collect money from a criminal. While in town, he begins staying with an old flame. He discovers that her boss is feeding her drug addiction, and in order to detox her, the two of them go and live in huts out in the Kazakh desert for a few weeks. When they return to the city, some stuff happens. And that's all I'm going to say about the plot without spoiling too much. I think the short runtime is well suited to this kind of story. It's so straightforward that having the film any longer would have only resulted in there being more filler scenes. One thing I've picked up about Soviet films is that there's a lot of emphasis given on the atmosphere of the setting. Be it urban or isolated, the filmmakers want you to understand how it feels to be right alongside the characters. It's all very introspective. This is especially important given the kinds of settings that there are in the film. Decaying urban centers and the Kazakh desert are very unique places to have scenes set. The success of this film gave Kino a new level of popularity, although Tsoi seemed to be rather uncomfortable with it all. When asked if he had a response to the fact that people were now seeing him as a ray of light, he said, "Just one thing. Don't create idols." In 1989, Kino recorded the compilation album Posledny Geroi, originally released only in France. It consisted of re-recorded past songs, and as such, I'm not going to be diving into it as a whole. However, it did contain a song they had been performing live, but hadn't yet released on an album up to that point. A little song called Khochu Peremen. This is the best song Kino has ever done, and that's not an exaggeration. From the moment it begins, energy starts pulsing through your veins. The intro has a cowboy-sounding guitar line mixed with a distorted lead riff, plus an extra acoustic guitar riff, and it all mixes perfectly. The drums don't let up for the entire song, and they never really change, but it doesn't matter, they keep the rhythm pumping. When the verse starts, the cowboy-like guitar playing continues, and it makes you both want to rock out and hop onto a horse. The bass playing fits the theme perfectly, playing a galloping pattern all throughout. When Viktor Tsoi sings, you just want to sing along with him, especially when the chorus comes. Lyrically, this is a song that could only have been written during the Gorbachev reforms, given how blatantly political it is. Tsoi isn't singing about any specific issues, but that only serves to make it all the more all-encompassing, especially during the chorus. We want change. Our hearts demand change right now. We want change. Our eyes demand change right now. In our laugh and our tears, and in every pulsation of veins. We want change. We're waiting for change. The verses are a little more cryptic, which is to be expected with how difficult it is to translate Russian into English, but there's a really good Reddit post dissecting them. This was actually the song that Kino played at the end of Assa. I deliberately didn't tell you back when I was discussing it so that I could save it until now. How sneaky of me. Because of how broad the lyrics are, it's been used during multiple protests, either played through speakers, sung by crowds, or having lyrics printed on signs. These include the 1991 Soviet coup d'etat attempt, the 1993 Russian constitutional crisis, the 2011 and 2020 Belarusian protests, and the 2014 Ukrainian Euromaidan. Funny enough, Tsoi said that the song was written without politics in mind, but rather personal change. No disrespect, Victor, but this is a case where the fans have a proper interpretation, and we say this song is political. Kino's first album following the masterpiece that was Khochu Peremen, Svezda po imeni Solntse, was released on August 29th, 1989. I would say that this is Kino's cleanest album up to this point. Not only that, but the mood is a good deal more subdued. There are still songs you can dance to, but probably not songs to take ecstasy to. Wikipedia has gothic rock listed as one of this album's genres, and that's not inaccurate. The opening track, Piesnia bez slov, has pounding programmed drums that made me bop my head, along with a steady bass line and a melody that sounds like it's played on a marimba. This feels like something you would hear on a movie soundtrack. Probably a noir movie. Nie Wiesyolaya Piesna is a song that manages to sound both calm and anthemic. This is done by having multiple vocal tracks during the chorus to make you want to sing along. Miesto delia Shagua Vipierod is one of the more upbeat songs on the record. The bass line is super danceable and the guitar line is funky. There's a guitar solo that's simple but nice. Kino have never been virtuosic musicians, but their solos always manage to be catchy. Pachka Sigare is the album's most listened to song on Spotify, and I can see why. It's very peaceful, with clean guitar playing, and it made me sway my head from side to side. There's another nice guitar solo, and overall, this song sounds like a throwback to their folkier days. The title translates to Pack of Cigarettes, and the lyrics discuss how, no matter where you are, things won't be so bad as long as you have some cigs with you. It's the simple pleasures that make it all worth it. Stuk is a song with a distorted guitar that's nice and upbeat. It sounds like a song you would hear during a montage scene in a movie. On that note, Pechal is a song that sounds like it would be a good fit for the closing scene of a movie. It's just an all-around great song. Nothing more to say about it. Sometimes a song is just good. I think this should have been the closing track of the album, even if the actual closing track, April, is a good song. In June of 1990, Kino reached a peak of their popularity when they played a concert at Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium, where the Olympic flame was lit for only the 5th time ever. Shortly after, Tsoi moved with Yuri Kasparian to Latvia to work on a follow-up album. On August 15, 1990, Tsoi was driving on the highway near the town of Tukums. He hadn't drunk any alcohol for the previous 2 days, but he was dealing with fatigue on that particular day. At 12:28 p.m., according to police, he fell asleep while driving. Going 100 kilometers or 62 miles per hour, he swerved into the opposite lane, collided head-on with a bus, and died instantly. He was 28 years old. He was survived by his son, Alexander, who was 3 years old at the time. The members of Kino immediately decided to disband, but not after making the album they were working on. With the vocals already recorded, they filled out the instruments and released the final Kino album in December of 1990. Officially untitled, it was referred to by fans as Chorny Albom, or Black Album. Listening to posthumously released albums always feels a little strange. For this one, I was worried that I might convince myself it was better than it really was, so that I wouldn't feel bad about criticizing an album released by someone about to die. However, I do think this is a truly great swan song of an album. I should also mention that none of the songs had official titles when the album was released, so all of the song names are fan-given. The opener, Lieto, has a danceable rhythm, but a melody that's a bit melancholy. It's clear from the get-go that this album will be continuing the mood of the previous one. Tsoi's singing on this album is great. While he was never a bad singer, I feel like his voice gradually gets better as Kino's discography progresses. Nam Estoboy has a bass line that sounds very suave. Imagine a guy swaggering down the street in leather shoes with his hair done nice. That's what this song sounds like. Forget the Bee Gees, Saturday Night Fever should have had Kino for its soundtrack. Kukushka is the longest song on the album, at a little over 6.5 minutes. That's another thing about this album. The songs are long, with none under 4 minutes. This one has a peaceful, clean guitar line and makes you want to sway in place. The lyrics are very existential. Tsoi vows to fight the challenges in life, no matter how lonely it gets, and also wonders how many songs he has left to write. Koguda Tvoya Diavushka Bolna is noticeably poppier than the other songs on the album. There's a chord progression that reminds me a bit of Have You Ever Seen the Rain by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Tsoi originally wrote this for a boy band to sing, but when the band was never created, he decided it would work for Kino. Apparently some fans didn't like the song due to how poppy it is, but honestly, I dig it. I listened to this album on Spotify, and that version has 2 songs that weren't included on the original release. One of them is a 35-second outro of sorts, but the other, Sozni na Moch Sambaregu, is pretty damn good. The intro sounds like it's in an odd time signature, and there are faint metallic beeps during the chorus. I'm definitely happy that these were included on the album, and there you have it. That's every Kino record. Kino's music remains highly popular. In the West, despite their songs being entirely in Russian, the music has proved popular in the doomer subculture. For those who have been living like a rock, doomers are people who are overly pessimistic and depressed about the state of their lives and the world. Basically, they're emos without the makeup. Doomer wave is music that's slowed down and has added reverb to emphasize the melancholic nature, and Kino's music has proved perfect for this. However, what I'm more interested in discussing is how the Russian nationalists have taken advantage of Tsoi's music to advance their cause. In Maria Engström and Alexei Semenenko's chapter, Recycling the Underground, Archive and Memory Politics in Contemporary Russia, for the book Counter-Archive, Memorial Practices for the Soviet Underground, they discuss how the legacy of Viktor Tsoi has been interpreted in modern times. As they write, in the situation of cultural stagnation in which present-day Russia finds itself, the Perestroika era in the 1990s, with all their unpredictability and uncertainty, seem to offer the most potential for reinterpretation, hence the interest in the cultural figures of that time. They define two main ways that his legacy has been interpreted in post-Soviet Russia: the populist and the liberal, although I'll focus on the populist way. This usually involves Russian imperialism. During the Perestroika years, Viktor Tsoi represented the myth of the last hero, an individual set against a collective Soviet myth, and became a symbol of resistance and freedom from surrounding oppression. Today, Kino songs are becoming an important part of another ideological context, a patriotic narrative of Russia's resistance to the forces of evil, i.e. the West, while Tsoi himself morphs into a skrepa, spiritual bond, and a hero of the Russian world. Engström and Semenenko describe how, in terms of specific songs, Gruppa Krovi has been appropriated by pro-Russian separatists in the Donbass region of Ukraine. Not only this, but a cover of Kukushka, performed by Polina Gagarina, was included in the 2015 movie The Battle for Sevastopol, Sevastopol being the largest city in the Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory of Crimea. While the movie itself was a joint Russian and Ukrainian production and had begun its filming prior to the occupation, Kukushka became appropriated as a patriotic anthem in support of the Russian occupation. This use of his music went directly against the stance he gave in a 1987 interview where he said, "Those who write supposedly patriotic songs and supposedly anti-war songs don't believe in it." Viktor Tsoi stood against everything that was expected in mainstream Soviet society. He represented hope that things would soon get better for those in the Soviet Union. At least for those in Russia, things nowadays are arguably just as bad. Russians live under the rule of a dictator who imprisons his political opponents and invades other nations. I don't know what Tsoi's political beliefs would be like now, but I assume that if he saw what Russia would become under Putin, it would remind him a lot of the country he grew up in. And not in a good way. To end this section, there's a short piece written by Brian Whitmore for Radio Free Europe called Viktor Tsoi and a Russia That Never Was. It's too good to take just one quote, so I'm going to read it almost verbatim with some bits cut out. Viktor Tsoi embodied late Soviet cool before it was overtaken by post-Soviet kitsch, and divined late Soviet hip before it was overrun by post-Soviet glitz. He epitomized late Soviet sincerity before it gave way to post-Soviet cynicism, and channeled late Soviet angst before it morphed into post-Soviet nihilism. Tsoi, who died in an automobile accident a quarter of a century ago on August 15, 1990, at the tragically young age of 28, would be in his 50s today. We never got to see Tsoi in middle age. Like all iconic figures who die before their time, the trailblazing Soviet rocker remains frozen in our minds, clad in black jeans and a t-shirt, a wild mane of black hair flopping in the breeze, a guitar in his hand and a cigarette dangling from his mouth. Always a cigarette dangling from his mouth. Tsoi is a reminder of more hopeful time, a time of introspection and anxiety, but also a time of promise, a time when anything and everything seemed possible. No, we never got to see Tsoi in middle age, but we have seen the generation he inspired. For most of them, the hopes and ideals of their youth died not long after Tsoi did. Some are still holding out hope for that promise of change that was never truly fulfilled, and Tsoi remains frozen in time, a symbol of the post-Soviet Russia that never was. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like what you saw, be sure to like and hit subscribe. I make these videos whenever I can. I always have a ton of fun making them. Hopefully you have as much fun watching them. If you have an idea if you have a suggestion for a video you want me to do, leave it down in the comments. Who knows, maybe I'll get to it. I'm RobbieJ2734. I will see you when I see you next.